So we're gonna, I don't, do we even need a microphone? Or am I fine without a microphone? Because it's just like.
All right, let's do without it.
So we're gonna go ahead and get started. And we really appreciate y'all coming to this workshop and for being here, period. This is become one of my favorite events of the year. And Mark usually starts the last time we did it, started off. So I'll let him start off because he does a much better introduction than me. We are doing this healthcare presentation. So I'm Christine, and I'm a survivor of familial trafficking, CSEC. And I've been working on a provisional grant with Dignity Health and CAS, which is an anti-trafficking organization in Los Angeles. And I provide emergency services to anybody that's potentially being trafficked or at risk for being trafficking within the hospital and healthcare systems. I don't do it to work with law enforcement or anything like that outside of the hospital. And it's a survivor to survivor kind of system, and we're going to talk more about that. And also work directly with our staff and other social workers and all of that within the hospital to continually educate our staff, and so they will know what signs to look for and even how to speak to patients. Because before that, they would, since about 2004, they would get kind of a 1-hour training or a webinar. But as we know, that's not really enough. You come to stuff like this, and even if you did that, that would have been way above and beyond. But you might not remember a good portion of what you hear today, or especially if you go to a 1-hour training or a 2-hour training. You might remember some really powerful story you heard, but you might not remember a bunch of indicators you need to look for. In healthcare, they're looking for how to screen, which we're kind of trying to really move away from these 5 things you need to look for when a person comes through the triaging station to what are these red flags we want to look for in patients, right? Because it's not tick off these boxes, okay, this person's safe. Because people are going to lie to you a lot, especially with trafficking. And it's not like you would say to somebody, hey, you being trafficked? And they're going to say, yes, I am. Because most of the people don't know they're actually being trafficked or what that even means or what that looks like. And most of the patients that we get in that are actively being trafficked or maybe not, or maybe they're at risk for being trafficking, or maybe they are being trafficked, they don't even know the words for that or the numbers to call, even though we have these great hotlines, including Polaris, which is the national trafficking hotline. So we're there to kind of ask questions in a conversational way that would make them feel safe enough to disclose something that would be trafficking, right? But wouldn't say, are you being trafficked? Because they're going to say no every time and they won't even know what that means. So that's and as a survivor then, if I know part of what that might look like in their life, then I disclose part of my own story, just so they won't think, well, I'm the only one, because for a long time I thought I was the only one who had ever been through anything like what I had been through. And so I would have never disclosed anything like that. And there's a lot to consider in the healthcare sector that is way different than if you're meeting someone in the street, or if you're law enforcement, or even if you're working in the nonprofit world and you get a phone call from someone. And Mark will expound on that a little more, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I'll let Mark introduce himself.
So my name is Mark. I'm the director of an emergency department in downtown Los Angeles. We're the only level 2 trauma facility, or only trauma facility in downtown Los Angeles. And so with that, we see quite a few different things that take place. And of all the fun things that do take place in Los Angeles, and I'll let your imaginations run wild with that. Those events typically end up in our emergency department at some point during the course of the weekends or just the individual events. And so one of the interesting things that we're going to talk a little about is just kind of what this project has looked like. So I'm new to Dignity Health. I've been at our current hospital, California Hospital Medical Center, for about a year. And in that year, we've really worked on changing kind of the dynamic of what education we're going to be giving to our staff nurses and to all our healthcare employees. So as Christine kind of alluded to, currently in our organization, we have elected to ensure that during the orientation, hospital-wide, any employee that comes through, whether they're environmental services, a social worker, a chaplain, or a nurse, or an ER tech, or anything that falls in that range of a healthcare provider or somebody that's working at the hospital, will go through a 1-hour course on human trafficking. And that's something that Dignity Health said, hey, we're going to take this on as an initiative. We want to do this, which was great. But as Christine kind of already alluded to, with that, we really don't get the opportunity to really understand everything in that paradigm. And so what we did is we kind of focused on the entry points of the hospital and said, hey, this is where we're going to put some extra resources and some extra money into it to make sure that we're not missing anybody. And so what we've done is Dignity Health provided a grant for CAST, the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking in Los Angeles, to hire a survivor advocate, which is Christine. And I got to tell you, this is all fairly new to me. I heard of human trafficking, domestic human trafficking, when I worked in Utah, at the University of Utah, but just briefly. And I feel like over the last year, my awareness has exploded thanks to this woman over here. She is, in my opinion, the most valuable asset I've ever met in my entire life. The wealth of knowledge that she has and her ability to make these people that are absolute victims feel comfortable has changed the way that my staff approach human trafficking. And so I can't say enough about what she's already done. But what we did is Dignity Health said, hey, look, we're going to have this person and we're going to figure out what it looks like. And once CAST put this, got Christine hired, they really didn't know what level they wanted to use her or how the hospitals would work with her. And so I was new to the hospital and I said, hey, I'm going to just steal you and I'm going to be greedy and I'm going to make you mine. And that has been the biggest success of our hospital. So Christine currently works in the emergency department on Wednesdays and Fridays. And then we have 2 additional sister hospitals just up the road a little ways where she reaches out to. And we'll get Long Beach in there in just a second. I'm talking about the ones that started earlier on.
Okay.
So we have 2 sister hospitals just north of us that said, well, hey, we want to make sure that we're educating people as well. So can we still, and so now she's getting a lot more calls to respond to those hospitals. And then just recently, and you'll see as we go through this, another one of our sister hospitals just south of us said, well, hold on a second, we want to get involved in this as well. So it's just been this ripple effect. And again, I give the credit to what Christine has been able to do. And we're going to talk about that during this presentation, is the impact that we've had as having a survivor advocate within the walls of a hospital and how it changes the dynamic of the staff that are working in those areas. So specifically, the emergency department is the entry point for all hospitals. About 78% of our patients come into the ER. We are 3.5 blocks away from Skid Row, which is currently the largest homeless population in the nation. And we're about 1.5 blocks away from the Staples Center, which means that the people that are multimillionaires or billionaires that have box suites at the Staples Center can become our patients as well. So we have a really unique kind of paradigm as far as who we serve. But understanding, as I'm learning more and more about human trafficking is no respecter of persons. Meaning, the owner of the box suite could absolutely be participating in this as the buyer, and then the victims on Skid Row could absolutely be the person that is being victimized. And so it's really a unique place to be. And I know that we're specifically talking about sex trafficking here, but we also talk a little bit more about the labor trafficking and how the garment district plays into these things, which again, Los Angeles does a lot of work with as well. So it's been a big eye-opener as far as what we do and how we can really make our staff aware of what we're doing. So the emergency department staff, and now we're bringing in labor and delivery, because oftentimes these people are coming in pregnant and they're not getting the prenatal care that they need. And so we're seeing a lot more consultations and conversations where our labor and delivery nurses are calling Christine saying, oh my gosh, what do we do with this patient? And again, we'll talk about that in just a second. And so this program has just kind of, I think Christine and I have kind of just created it, and people have said, wow, this is really interesting. What can we do to get involved? And, you know, Christine and I kind of laugh about it now because when we started, I was this new director in this hospital with nurses that had been there for many years, and they'd seen directors come and go. And I was coming in and I was bringing more and more people in, more and more staff. And then I brought Christine in as a survivor advocate, and I'd have nurses come up to me and say, hey, what are you doing with this person, and why is she asking me these questions? And they didn't really know how to respond. But now we're at the point where Christine is not an outsider. She's by 100% been brought into the fold. If you're healthcare providers, you know that nurses are kind of hesitant to change their ways. Christine is a member of our team, and they turn to her as a peer and as a colleague to figure out what is the best outcome for these patients. So there's been a few little challenges that we've had to work through with the healthcare setting. Just by a show of hands, how many of you are in the healthcare setting? Fantastic. And how many of you come from the law setting? Okay. And then what group did I miss?
Survivor setting.
Well, that is the most important of all.
Well, like social service providers, those kind of like agency, like direct services.
So one of the biggest hurdles in healthcare, which my healthcare people will understand as well as our lawyers, is that we have this thing called HIPAA that is just in the way of everything. And so by definition, Christine is not an employee of Dignity Health. And so how do we go about making sure that we don't breach patient confidentiality, but also allow her to be a resource through what we're trying to do is bringing awareness to human trafficking and helping those people that are in need. And so what we've done is we have educated through Christine's help, specifically doing one-on-one coaching with essentially all of the nursing and healthcare staff in the emergency department. And we do this through huddles, through staff meetings, regular conversation because she's in the department, and saying, hey, these are the things that you guys should be looking for. These are questions that would be appropriate to ask. And so as the staff begin to screen patients that are potential victims or at risk for becoming victims of human trafficking, then once we identify these people, then we say, hey, just so you know, we have a survivor advocate, and her name's Christine. Would you be comfortable meeting with her? And as long as they accept that help, then Christine can come in because at that point they have accepted the help, and so there's no breach of that patient confidentiality. And so we can bring her into this conversation, and that's where she does what Christine does and changes the lives of these people. She always throws it back to me that, hey, you save people's lives with gunshot wounds and all this other stuff. That is totally different. Christine is changing lives for people that have been at risk and have essentially gone unnoticed by society. And it has been just exciting for me to watch what she does. And it's actually spread throughout the entire hospital. We talked a lot about viruses and how they spread like wildfire. This is one of those kind of initiatives that has just spread throughout the hospital. She now gets consultations from patients that are in the inpatient setting, labor and delivery, and the ER. And then she gets called to our 3 hospitals that surround us. And so she is probably the busiest person I've ever met. But she does amazing things. So with that, we'll kind of go through what we've got for you. And I like to make sure that we kind of mix this stuff up. So please ask the questions. Let's have a conversation about this because nobody wants to hear the two of us talk for 2 hours. Okay? All right.
So this just describes that the kind of what we stated already, that it was a pilot program funded because we're trying to prove that it's both effective and helpful and empowering to the survivor to have this program, right? And they're going to be producing a study to prove that. And what we want to do at the end of this is, not we, but they want to be able to produce something that proves that it's helpful and effective to have, at least in major areas, to hire a survivor to be part of hospital settings, because we know that survivors, and I'll be proving this like throughout this, are coming into healthcare settings. And when you come into an emergency department, as you know, if you've ever been into an emergency department, you're there for a long time, like potentially 4 or 5 hours. And so if the staff identifies you potentially being trafficked, and we call an advocate with the permission, like that's a prime target area
to get the help you need. And it is a place that pimps and traffickers will allow a victim to go to get medical care so that they can keep working. Whereas like other places, you know, even if you go in to say get a burger, you're in and out in 5-10 minutes. And even if somebody suspects, you can't get any help. And so this is a prime area, and also to say that this is a major health concern. Like this is a major health need, and people will continue going downhill until they do hit rock bottom. And sometimes that rock bottom is down, and we don't want that to happen. So we're saying that's why we've kind of talked about that. So we're gonna go through kind of these, I call them tent pegs, that I kind of built my trainings on. Otherwise it just, I was a teacher. So that's kind of like, I do like a lesson plan, but it won't be boring. So, I mean, you guys already know that trafficking exists. We did this training in another place, and it just, I have to start somewhere. And seeing beyond that trafficking exists, because we have to move the needle forward more than just like a 101 situation. So what's beyond that, right? What's beyond making all of our staff go to a 101? Like what happens, what's next? And then changing that, right? So then what? So those are the kind of 3 tent pegs we're going to start. So don't worry, the beginning part is going to go fast. It might be a little boring, but it's always important. I know that this conference, everybody kind of already knows these things, but I like to always be on the same page with everyone so that people aren't all having different definitions in their heads.
She really throws it in there for me because I'm so new at this. She's like, okay, Mark, let's make sure you're not missing anything here. Let's really make sure that you're up to speed with everybody else. So she's doing it for me.
So the ability to see, as you can tell, just in the beginning part we had, like Shay came to me and she said, well, what did you think? Like, she's like, we have to start with bite-sized pieces for people. Even, you know, it was like, well, I would have liked to offer this, and this, right, for people. And she's like, you'll be able to, don't worry, you know? and so, you know, legally, for the lawyers out there, and a lot of times I have had lots of conversations with our staff, and sometimes staff will come up to me and say, well, what about this, and what about this, and help me understand this. And what we need people to understand, it's the elements of force, fraud, and coercion legally, right? So human trafficking exploitation can be a lot of things, but it has to show the elements of force, fraud, and coercion legally. And so we talk about, so I didn't write the whole law out. You can look up the whole law if you want. I'm just not going to spend a bunch of time talking about like the extent, like reading through the entire law right now, because I just didn't feel like that would be a good use of our time. A lot of you are lawyers, you know the whole law. But basically 3 buckets, I like to say, like you can have not people in, but that we have the containers of. So CSEC are minors, so anyone engaged in commercial sex that's under the age of 18. That's one arena, right? So within the healthcare setting, we have someone under 18. They say, yeah, so what, I'm 16, I'm a prostitute, I'm working on this street, wait, I'm recognized what the street is. Okay, that person might say that, but they're really being trafficked, you know, if they say that. So that's one. Any adult engaged in commercial sex that has the elements of force, fraud, or coercion. They may say they have a pimp, they may not, if there's elements of force, fraud, and coercion. And I'm going to talk about some case studies later. But when we see certain things and we know there's force, fraud, or coercion going on, that's trafficking, right? And when they see red flags, the nurses don't have to decide if that's force, fraud, or coercion. Like that's when they're like, Christine, we need you here, right? And anyone of any age induced to perform labor services via force, fraud, or coercion in labor, trafficking, involuntary child labor, right? So labor trafficking as well legally. So we don't only do sex trafficking, although that is what most of the cases we see are, at least in Los Angeles.
In other parts of the country, it might be different.
So I'm going to jump in here real quick for my healthcare people. So for Dignity Health, one of the things that we looked at was whether we wanted to tie some questions for this specifically into our triage form. So for those of you that aren't familiar in the healthcare setting, when patients come into the emergency department, we have a nurse, and sometimes depending on the severity or the way the departments are staffed, we might have maybe a physician assistant or a nurse practitioner that will be in that triage conversation as well, just to find out how severely ill they are, to figure out how quickly we need to have a doctor see those patients. And so one of the conversations that we had was, well, should we put this information and should we kind of start to do the digging in to find out if we should start to investigate if they're at risk for human trafficking in our triage? Now, the Emergency Nurses Association says that a triage should take no longer than 3 minutes. Okay, and that's because you're trying to move through patients quickly to really figure out how acutely ill they are. However, the state of California likes to force a lot of questions into what we're asking people because they like to get information on people. And so currently the average triage time is about 7 to 9 minutes, which is a disservice to our patients. And so we want to move through that process. And so we had a conversation as to whether we should include more questions into our triage. And we said no. I essentially said no. This will be something that, as Christine already mentioned, patients are there for a long duration of time. In a busy downtown emergency department where essentially we're the primary care for a lot of people that are in the lower socioeconomic status, we are their healthcare provider. And so patients on average are there for about 4 hours. So they don't need to be identified in the first 7 minutes at risk for this. We'll assign that to that primary nurse, and then that provider will then go on and find out additional questions if we have red flags that bump as we go through that primary assessment. So I just wanted to throw that in there for you guys as well. Good people.
So that was a law written out from TVPA. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. Written in 2000. It's reauthorized every 2 years. So I'm not going to go through that. The AMP model just has actions, means, and purpose, right? So action is inducing, recruiting, harboring, transporting. Means force, fraud, and coercion. They do not have to prove force, fraud, or coercion if a person is under 18 and is engaged in commercial sex. So law enforcement is going to have to prove that, and for the purpose of commercial sex or labor trafficking. So this is a map from Polaris. I believe it's from 2016. These are all the calls that came in to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And it's gone up by 13%, I believe, in 2017, 2018, something like that. And you can see where we live is a very hot zone, as is most of the country. The only area it's not is the Midwest, and not the really Midwest, but this area. And that's mostly because just people probably don't know or know to call, or it's not the trafficking isn't happening.
So when Christine showed this to me for the first time, I was like, what the heck? This is crazy. Because like I said, this is still fairly new to me. So I spent about 2 years right here in smack dab Salt Lake City, Utah, at the University of Utah, where I first learned about human trafficking. I was an educator for our emergency department staff, and so I trained them specifically on trauma care. And as I started learning more about human trafficking, they did a lot of focus specifically in Salt Lake because the I-15 runs north-south, and then the I-80 runs east-west, and so Salt Lake City is actually a big transport hub for human trafficking, something I had no idea about. But traffickers will then use Salt Lake City as the hub to run their victims throughout the country, which blew my mind. And then when I came back to California and Christine showed me this, I was like, okay, well, that makes sense for Salt Lake City, but then holy smokes, if you look at the East Coast and the West Coast, just how much this is going on and how prevalent it is. And yet, on the healthcare side, which is what we're talking about, what are we doing to help these patients when they come in, to let them know that we're actually here to advocate for them and help them when they feel like they don't have a voice, or when nobody's looking at them. And so that's kind of what we're trying to focus on here.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd like to point out about this is only people who called in. Mm-hmm. These aren't actually the number of victims or the actual number of people that are being trafficked. These are only, when I was being trafficked, I didn't know there was a hotline or any help available or anything like that. And most people who are actually in active victimization don't know there's any place they can call
or any resources for them. So I mean, it looks like a lot, and it is a lot, but there's a lot of other people who are actively being victimized right now who don't know there's anywhere they can reach out. And it's not because we're not telling people about the number or anything like that. It's just that people actually need the number, and numbers not getting to them. And places like hospitals do have posters out and stuff with the number. It's just so while this is a lot, it's a lot more people are being victimized and it's not being anywhere. So what? My throat's like really dry. Sorry.
I can cover this one.
Okay.
So one of the things that I look at when Christine kind of had this conversation with me to help me understand why this is going to be of value was this information specifically. That 86 to 88% of survivors reported that at some point while they were being trafficked, they presented to some form of a healthcare provider. And that just kind of baffled me. Now, whether they were brought to, some random friend that may have some little bit of background in healthcare, but out of their garage, or whether they actually presented to a hospital, an emergency department, or urgent care, or to a primary doctor, at some point while they were trafficked, they presented to some healthcare professional. Now, I'm not saying that all healthcare professionals are perfect, but if that was the case, and yet the amount of people that were identified was a fraction of that, that's a concern. And so we looked at that, and I said, we've got to do something different here. And that's why we made the decision that we're going to educate our staff, and we're going to be a voice of change, and we're going to let people know that we're doing something different in our hospital. And so whether they are being trafficked, but they don't want to identify themselves as being trafficked, they know that the next time that they have to come to the hospital, that if they come to this specific hospital, these people are looking for it. And so we hopefully will become a safety net for them. Now, one of the things that I like to talk about specifically for our healthcare providers in here, I work with my medical director on a regular basis. And we text each other and we call each other, bounce ideas off of each other all the time, saying, hey, what do we need to do to make this work? And so what we've done is when we identify people that are a potential risk, if we say, hey, we think this person's a risk for being trafficked, but we don't have any definitive reason to say that she is, then our healthcare provider, our physician, may say, hey, you know what, they came in for abdominal pain. I'm just going to pretend that I'm going to put in an order for a CT of their abdomen or an ultrasound of their abdomen, even though it may not be necessarily warranted. And we won't do it. We'll just say that we're going to do it because in the event that they come into the hospital and they've got their pimp or their John, or as Christina's educated me on, a bottom girl, that somebody's there, the one place that we can isolate that person is in an area where there's radiology and there's a risk to those other people. And so what we do is we say, hey, you know what, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to keep you over here because we're going to go run some tests, and that test is not safe for you as an innocent bystander. And so then we bring them into this room, and again, we have a conversation with our doctor before we do this, and we say, hey, you know what? The doctor says, okay, let's go and do this. And as soon as that doctor then brings them into the room, they have a conversation and say, hey, you know, I've seen this type of presentation before, and it was from somebody who was being forced to engage in sexual practices without her consent. Is that something that's a risk for you? Or when you go home, are you able to provide food for yourself? And asking them the questions that are a concern for somebody who's being a victim of trafficking. And then once we find out that, hey, we are right or we're completely wrong, then we can figure out what help we want to give them if they're interested in that help. Again, the biggest thing is that we don't force the help upon them. If they're willing to get that help, we'll give it to them. And so if Christine's there, we'll use Christine. We can also use our social workers, which we have staffed in our department on a regular basis. And then if Christine is not there, but we do use our social worker, then we can contact CAST outside and say, hey, look, this is somebody who has these things going on, and we can work through those processes. And that's been a big thing.
What this is to me is possibility, like for people who are being victimized. We know this was a survey done for people who had survived trafficking, and they were asked about when you're being victimized, did you ever go into a healthcare facility? And they said yes. So this is like possibility of all these potential lives that we could intersect, right? And yeah, we're not intersecting them before the trafficking occurs, but we are potentially intersecting them when the trafficking is occurring, potentially helping them to exit or helping the trafficking to be shorter than it could be or have a different outcome. And that actually comes from a healthcare journal. So there's a lot of different strategies that we can use, but this is there. There's a bunch of different indicator sheets. This one isn't perfect. It's for one in a healthcare setting. So if you don't work in a healthcare setting, this isn't going to be one that you're going to use, right? So some things that happen when people come in is they might say, things like, they might say they got, maybe there's some kids upset, but really, like, they have all these different presentations. Maybe they have bruises, maybe they have, just nothing is matching up. Just like domestic violence, like they say, oh yeah, well, I just banged into the wall, but then they're like, side of their face is bruised up, or they start throwing up, or things like that. They might have tattoos, like brandings. And I helped people understand what that even means, right? So we can notice that. And OB can really notice brandings, because when you're having a baby, you're making, this is what it is. People who have a lot of signs of trauma. You have trauma, you can't help it. Okay, it's just and you have people who are trafficked will have severe trauma, and the longer you've been trafficked, if you have familial trafficking, you're going to have severe trauma. And sometimes you can hold it together, and other times you just can't. Somebody might look like somebody, and it's not their fault, but they might remind you of someone, and you're going to lose it. And you either might completely shut down, or you might start screaming, or you might do a lot of other things. And there's things that people can do within the healthcare setting to help that person to be calmer. Like, a lot of our nurses are really, not all of them, but a lot of them can be really empathetic and caring, and that can be very helpful. Or just even saying, explaining what you're going to do before you do it. If you're I'm just going to be straight with you, because you're at this conference and you should be able to handle it. But if you're laying down on a bed, and then stuff's starting poked and prodded into you, and people aren't telling you what they're doing, and then if you start getting aggressive, which nurses will have to do for their own safety, but then they start restraining you, it's going to remind you of you being trafficked, right? They start doing stuff to you, they start taking off clothes, just doing all these things, and if you're brought in as a trauma, they will have to do that to you to save your life. But if they don't explain to you what's happening, it feels exactly the same. And so we talk about trauma-informed lawyering. This is trauma-informed medical care. When they just start grabbing you for whatever reason and doing all these things to you, you either start screaming, literally. I recently did that. In a medical appointment, and I told them I'm really nervous. This has happened to me, and I don't think they took me seriously. And the doctor's like, "Oh, I take you seriously now." I told you, I warned you, and she's like, "You're acting a little nervous," and it was like, "Yeah, this is a gynecological appointment, and yeah, I'm acting nervous." And then I freaked out. But yeah, so even we had a patient who ended up identifying as trafficking, and she had all these signs of trauma, right? And the nurse and I were there, and she went to check her arm, because that's where her wristband was, and she didn't warn her she was going to do that, and she started shaking and shaking and shaking and crying. She was like, "I'm so sorry." She's like, "I always warn people. I just forgot." And we just sat there with her. We sat there with her until she stopped shaking. And so even something as simple as checking for her name again. Because, by the way, I'm just going to check your wrist. I'm just going to check your wrist right now. Like, we wouldn't normally do that. Like, we're just like, hey, can I check your wristband real quick? Like, because she had been so beaten up. That's being trauma-informed, right? And just telling people step by step by step what you're going to do, which is way more than you would probably normally do. And no matter what your field is, like I spoke to hospital social workers recently, and they were like, maybe we should do that too. Like, we just go in, and I was like, yeah, maybe you should. Like working with traumatized people, and then you just go in and meet with them once, and they're like, by the way, you're going to XYZ place. No wonder they start screaming at you. Yeah, so anyways, this is a sheet. So we talk about empowering staff. So we've already talked about empowering all staff. So a lot of times people talk about empowering people, training people at the top, or training the important staff, right? Training the nurses, training the doctors. But what about security? You know, what about the cleaning staff? I mean, because say you're on one of the floors and you know to hold it together in front of your nurse. But then once the cleaning crew comes in, like, if the trafficker's with you, he or she might lose it in front of them. And the cleaning staff might actually be the one that identifies that the patient is unsafe or in a dangerous situation, or that person who was visiting, they actually were really horrible to them, you know, and it didn't seem like that person was safe. And so what I like to view it as, like, we're all, like, everybody has different jobs, right? And so, but this is, on this playing field, everyone is equal. Like, everyone can identify, everyone needs to be trained, no one is better than anyone else. Like, everyone has eyes to see this, right?
So let me talk a little about how we executed that, because in my opinion, I think one of the biggest takeaways specifically of this entire 2-hour presentation is what Christine just alluded to in regards to having the conversation with these people, with these victims, with these patients. So in the healthcare setting, to the fault of healthcare providers, we often assume that when you come to a hospital, that if I say, oh, we're going to order some lab work, you already know I'm going to poke you with a needle, and I'm going to pull out some blood. And if I'm going to poke you with a needle, I might start an IV on you at the same time, just so I don't poke you twice. And so oftentimes we already have that expectation that you know this, where in reality the lay public does not know what's going to happen to them in a healthcare setting. And so we're not great at communicating, and that's one of the faults of our own practice. And so we spent a lot of time through these huddles specifically talking to our staff. And just as Christine said, everybody was given the power to initiate or say, hey, look, I'm concerned about this. Just as every single employee in our hospital has the ability to activate a code stroke if we suspect that somebody's having a stroke. Whether you're an environmental service employee, a security officer, or a volunteer in the hospital, you can initiate a code stroke on your own, because heaven forbid you get all those people there and you're wrong. Okay, you're wrong. It's not that big of a deal. But if you're right, you just save that person's life. So the same rules apply to these people that we identify as victims or potential victims of human trafficking. Anybody has the right to say, hey, I'm worried about that patient over there in room such and such. And they just go to the nurse or to the doctor that's taking care of that patient and say, hey, this was something that I noticed, or this is one of the things that I heard. And so that way they are empowered to make a difference. I will tell you, we had Christine in huddles regularly for weeks on end. But I think the thing that changed it specifically was having Christine in the nursing station doing her shifts, so that people got comfortable with her, started to ask her more and more questions, because they wanted to learn, they wanted to know more. Like, hey, who is this person I'm working with for 12 hours at a time that's right next to me? Because we start to have a conversation. And Christine started to establish that conversation and that rapport, and started to then have these nurses come and say, hey, I have a patient that's kind of a little more reserved, they've got lots of bruises, and they're not really matching the story that I'm telling them, what other things should I ask? Because, again, Christine can't get there until that patient says, yeah, let's go ahead and bring Christine into the conversation. And so we just start to work through this. And then once one of those nursing staff or providers then gets to the point where they're like, you know what, I think I have somebody that I'd like you to talk to. Would you be comfortable talking with a survivor advocate of human trafficking? Her name's Christine, and she can just have a conversation with you. Sure, let's go ahead and bring her in. And so that was one of the things that changed. So I would just advocate for lots and lots of communication because, again, it's one of the faults that we have. We just assume that people know what's going to happen when they're in the hospital. Mm-hmm. And so we pay a lot of attention to educating our staff and then talking to our patients and educating them about what's going to happen while they're in that emergency department or throughout the hospital. One of the other big things that I would say is when you think of hospitals, I think you typically think of doctors and nurses. One of the other people that has become an invaluable team member was our social workers. Because all patients that are hospitalized, before they get discharged out of a hospital, have a consultation with a social worker to ensure that wherever they're going to is a safe place for them. And so once our social workers got to become more comfortable with Christine, if there was a trigger that said, hey, something doesn't seem right here, they'd then reach out to Christine and say, hey, this patient has this, this, and this going on. Is there anything else that I should screen for? And Christine makes jokes about it, but we did have a social worker that would literally walk up to people and say, hey, are you being trafficked? And Christine was like, you can't ask that question. And so it took coaching because, you know, I'm not a social worker, but this is something that is new to them, just as it was new to us. And we had to learn how to develop the soft skills to figure out how to have these questions and how to appropriately ask these questions. And so she's done the same thing with our social workers. And so now they're asking these soft questions, establishing that rapport with people, and we are able to make a big difference. And you'll see that in just a little bit.
Yeah. I also have some resources there because, like, night shift, they don't intersect with them very much. And it actually came out of the education department handing me an empty binder and saying, hey, can you fill this up?
And she did. And it's ginormous.
And some of the nurses, I was like, I went to one of my chargers, I was like, I don't know when you guys are ever going to have time to look at this, but, and they said, we will, can you actually make 2? And then I made smaller ones for the floors and for triage and stuff like that. And they're like, just put, and my nonprofit like laughs at me about this, but it's true. Like now I love the hospital so much, like it's sort of my happy place. And they're like, just make sure you put them in the first one had plastics, and then make sure, and if you work in healthcare, you'll understand why. Like, make sure you put plastic, just in case of blood or like bladder fluids, you know, it just wipes them off real fast. It's kind of funny, but it is what it is, right? And so we did that, and then one of the nurses came to me soon after, and there were like 2 places where they can go, you know, like, and so it moved quickly from the side to like this top place where like you use them all the time, like. And they have different ones for different, you know, different areas.
I think we have a slide in here with the tattoos on, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, if not, I'll talk a little more about that.
So anyways, I mean, those things. But what I think really helped change things for them was, I mean, I definitely became part of this team, which is, as a survivor, it was amazing for me because I never really had a place where I fit in before. And it is a very tight-knit community, a tight-knit team. But there's a lot more to say about that. But I had one of the nurses come to me after and was like, that finding you made is amazing. But it has all my contact information too, because they would be like, where's your card again? I lost it again. Because stuff gets lost in the emergency department, like, oh, like you can give it still in like 5 minutes and like, I lost your card. like literally again. So part of it was that, so like I could always find me if they needed me. And then part of it for them, when they intersect with patients, they can now say like, hey, I have a friend that's a survivor. Would you be interested in talking to her? Because now they go to it and they're like, I have a friend. So maybe I'm not their best friend. Maybe they don't, you know, go out to dinner with me all the time, but they do have a friend who is a survivor. And so, so it wasn't like that far reached for them to say that, and they can call me, they can reach out to me.
So it just made that step a little bit easier than like, I'm going to call the local service provider and like reach out to like some anonymous staff and call their hotline, you know, that feels like cold to somebody who's already like being uncomfortable in the emergency department. So this is just Dignity Health 101. We can get that to you, but basically anybody can go on Dignity Health 101, Human Trafficking 101, and access it for free.
And this is the hour-long education that all employees that are going to be new to Dignity Health go through in their onboarding orientation. It's an hour-long training. Goes through labor trafficking and sex trafficking and the signs that you should be looking for. And like Christine said, it is free. So that's an available resource if you're interested in it. And we'll talk about that at the end.
So going beyond and engaging patients. So we have this video Dignity Health put together about what we're doing at the hospital. And it's probably going to be like so loud, so sorry. I'll try to turn it down, but I'm not sure how.
All the things that I've gone through in my life, all the really painful, hard things that I've gone through, and using all those things now to help people and empower people and turning the things that were painful into something that is restoring and changing lives.
Many Americans believe that human trafficking is something that happens over there in some other country. And the reality is that every country is affected by human trafficking, including the United States. Here in the United States, we have both sex and labor trafficking.
These patients are actually presenting into emergency departments throughout the country, and they are being seen for the complaint that they come in for, and then they're discharged without any services or without anybody recognizing what's really going on. So we have a survivor advocate who has joined our team. Her name's Christine. She comes to our emergency department twice a week, and she really works with our staff to find out if there's anybody that could be at risk for labor trafficking as well as sex trafficking.
The patients respond to me because I come at them with a lot of empathy, care, and concern, and I'll share what I've been through. And that is usually the bridge that needs to happen for somebody to take the next step or accept the help.
Many survivors and many advocates believe that having a survivor part of a victim response team would be very beneficial. And I can say for me personally, as a victim at age 14, if there was a survivor who was part of the law enforcement team and healthcare team that was trying to connect with me, it would have made all the difference, not only in that moment, but moving forward.
When I'm able to relate to them on a level that says, I've been there too, I understand, you're not alone, and you're not the only one who's ever gone through this. I've been there too, and there's lots of other people who've gone through what you've gone through, and we're going to figure this out together.
As we talk about these individuals that have been identified and have accepted help, you know, Christine and I will have a conversation, and her response is, Mark, that's great, but how many do you think we've missed? And so we've communicated that with the staff of, we're going down that right path, we're identifying these patients, but how many of them are we still missing?
The staff are getting more and more trained just by nature of me being here, just in having conversations and working alongside of each other, in just becoming aware.
The staff has become really emotional about this, both anger as well as disappointment that this is real and that it happens. And they want to change it and they want to fix it. It is scary and it's unfortunate and it's terrible, but the fact that we can do something about it is the most empowering thing.
Even though there are hard emotional days, it's just like I go home and feel like I don't ever want to stop doing this because we're helping people.
Dignity Health values survivors. I don't think there's any other healthcare system that has survivors leading, championing their program. And Dignity Health is showing the healthcare space that these lived experiences bring just as much value to the table as clinical expertise.
We're helping people like every day, and every day is an adventure. I love it. Like, it's great. It's wonderful.
Isn't she amazing?
Awesome.
Christine's the best person in the world. I cannot say enough about her.
Oh my gosh. You could stop it there. No, don't. Seriously, don't.
So that was a video that they helped put together to just showcase what we're doing. Sorry, I lost my balance there. So word was a lot. To showcase the Survivor Advocate program because it is no one else is doing it, like even in California, even throughout the dignity health system. So this is the peer tool. You have the peer tool. You can download, bless you, you can download peer tool as well. It's just a tool. One of the social workers at the hospital said, this is some basic knowledge. Why did they develop a whole thing? So it's involved in partnership with Heal Trafficking also. It's just a way, if I suspect, if any of us suspect that someone is at risk for any type of violence, not just specifically human trafficking, right? Anything that we would follow these kind of steps, but and also specifically human trafficking as well. We would do these, and this can be a much longer explanation, but I don't want to spend a long time on it. But and if you download the peer tool, there's like things on the back that you can use as well. Like you can put in your local phone numbers of local agencies. And I don't think I made two-sided, but there's a third page where you have space for that, for your local service area. So provide privacy. So obviously in an emergency department or even in a doctor's office or anywhere, I wouldn't, Katie's my friend, so I'll just pick on you. But, so if I thought she was at risk for some type of violence, I wouldn't come up to her in a busy emergency department and be like, hey, so Miss Katie, like, I just think that, well, and I wouldn't like call out this type of violence that I thought that we were starting to discuss and I thought she was at risk for, because that no longer protects her privacy. And one, she's going to deny everything if I talk to her in front of everyone. So I would pull her in a private area and speak to her privately because people are more willing to open up, but also protect their privacy, right? And so I mean, it's just basic common sense. Like, why would you, like, if you thought I was being trafficked, why would you talk to me in front of a crowd of people? Like, no.
So I'm going to interject here real quick. So one of the things that, again, this is all common sense. However, taking into consideration the usability of space that you have in emergency departments. So one of the things that we struggle with still in our current department is that we're a 33-bed emergency department, and we see on average about 280 to 300 patients a day. So we actually have chairs throughout our entire emergency department where patients are moved from chairs where they get their blood work done in one station and they move back into a chair, and then they go to get an x-ray done and then they move back to a chair, and then if anything comes back abnormal, then we'll move them to a bed because we have a space restriction as far as how much usable space we have. And so when Christine talks about, yes, you need to make sure that you're putting them in a safe space and you're providing that privacy, it's a common sense thing, but we did have to go back to the nurses and we did have to go back to the doctors and say, hey, you can't go and prod them on these questions when they're sitting in a chair with 20 other people lined up in the same hallway with them. If you want to do that, you need to actually have a conversation with the charge nurse and say, hey, I need to pull this person into a private space. And so it becomes a lot more orchestrating than you would think.
Yeah.
It's a simple act, but the process actually takes some time. And that was one of the biggest changes that we had to do to make sure that we were able to do that.
Yeah.
So I keep going.
So the next step, I'm just going to go quickly through this so we have some time, is educate. So it's like a universal education, just like when we're trying to give everyone the flu shot in the fall, like, some healthcare systems go a little over the top on that, but kind of like, hey, and a lot of times we say like, hey, we know this is a big problem in major cities like Los Angeles or like, whatever city you happen to live in. And it just might be a problem for you or your friends. We want to make sure your friends are safe too. So just, and I wouldn't do this like for everyone, but if you think they're at risk for violence, and we have like some brochures we can email you or something like that, just unless you like get one like the FBI has them on like every language possible, like literally.
So just universal education, or just speak to them, and then they could either ask questions, or you could ask questions, like they might start asking questions. And you know, even though, like, if they say, yeah, so I'm, you know, you, like, what do you do for money, kind of thing, and they say, oh, I'm, you know, or even if you think they're engaging in commercial sex, like, this physician friend of mine has asked her patients, and she's an adolescent physician, and not that she's an adolescent, she treats adolescents. That came across wrong. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not speaking clearly. She asked her patients, when was the first time you had sex and it was your choice? And that kind of changes the whole story. Because it's not when's the first time you ever had sex. Because, like, what do you, like, I mean, I don't know, like, probably like 2, like, I don't know. Like, but when that it was your choice, I mean, then it kind of like, you're gonna, because people might sort of bust down in tears, or never, or whatever. Or, you know, so like reframing questions like that, rather than we don't want to shame people, right? Like, we just want to make sure you're safe. That's the only reason we're having a conversation with you. We don't want to, like, have you leave here and be unsafe. So no one's going to, and especially where we live, I often will say, hey, I'm not the police. I don't work for the police. I work with the hospital, and I work for a nonprofit, and everything you say is going to be confidential, and you're not going to turn in. You're like, you know, everything's safe. Like, and that's especially if somebody, like, may not have their documentation status, or they might tell me, a lot of people's IDs are stolen, even if they're U.S. citizens. Their pimp steals their ID, their trafficker steals their ID, someone on the street steals their ID. So people often don't have an ID. But they're afraid, especially if they're may not look documented, they may not speak English, they may speak broken English, that you're going to turn them in. But I let people know right away, I'm not the police, I'm not interested in calling the police, I'm not, nothing, I'm not going to turn you in. So I'm just here to help you out. I'm going to do everything I can to help you out and see what we can do. So that's kind of that, and then we respect and respond. So what that means is if they lie to me, and I often know they do, or they say, I don't want your help right now, but hey, how can I reach you? Maybe I'll call you next week. Okay. So I give them a way to reach me, or yeah, so I'm prostituting, but I don't want to change. I want to go back to what I'm doing. Okay, that's fine. Like, we can't force them to stop. And if we put them into a program, some type of safe home or program or shelter, and they're not ready to leave, they're just going to run away the next day. And we did I did probably 8 hours of work for them to run away that night, you know? So it's not jail. We're not putting them into jail, like no one's being arrested. So if they choose to leave, then choose to leave. Like, we try to make them better than we found them, but sometimes that's not possible.
And I would say the hardest part of this process for the respecting the decision to not accept help has been the biggest challenge for my staff, both my nurses as well as the physicians, because we are ingrained to fix things, to make people feel better. And so when somebody comes in, this is a scar that's an emotional one. You know, this is living with trauma. You know, we refer to trauma in the ER as trauma with a capital T, is the gunshot stabbings. Yeah. This is lifelong trauma. And so the idea that we've been able to identify it, that the person has identified that they're struggling with it, and then they still refuse the help that we can provide them with, has been probably the hardest thing for my staff to accept. And so that's the part that is a real big challenge that we deal with on a regular basis. And we really have to just say, hey, look, no, just as Christy mentioned, we're here to help you. And though you're not interested in it right now, know that the next time you come here, we'll be here to take care of you, and we'll be here to give you whatever resources you want. But that's been one of the toughest struggles with this process since we started it.
So trauma-informed care, we talk about, trauma-informed care is kind of a catchphrase now, right? Everyone's talking about it, but understanding that we all, not all, but a lot of us have trauma. Some of us have more trauma than others. I have a lot. I walk into a lot of days with a lot of trauma because of my life, because of what I faced, because of things. And having people that are informed about that trauma and can face that trauma and aren't scared of me because of it has made all the difference, and have welcomed me in, has literally changed my life. And I don't say that lightly. And so for the patients that can do the same and has done the same, so letting people know they have a choice. People can refuse care because maybe they're afraid of the care. They're afraid of what has happened, what can happen, and to have things explained to them. And a lot of times people don't understand. I remember this one, sometimes in Los Angeles with the immigrant population, sometimes their reading education level is very low. A lot of people have had to drop out of school from a very young age, and our nurses do an amazing job of explaining things, but people sometimes still don't understand. And I remember the translator saying to his patient, saying to the nurse, the patient wants to know, it was discharging time, and the patient said, the patient wants to know what's wrong with them. So she didn't understand the entire time. So hear what the survivor is saying. So that means beyond just means hearing what they're saying and empowering them to make choices. So sometimes they have a choice okay, this and this and this is going on. You have a choice to do X, Y, or Z. What would you like help doing? What would you like me to help you do today? And a lot of times they won't know. So okay, how about if I just wait for a few minutes and we think about this together? Because they've never had a choice before. So it's not that easy, right? And to let them know, hey, there's an advocate, I can help you through this. A lot of times they just spend a long time with people, a long time with people, so they can figure out, they can realize that there's somebody there that will help them. Sometimes they have to come back the next day, and that's okay. It's okay.
So one of the things that I think, again, on that healthcare side is we look at the turnover. A big keyword in healthcare is throughput. How quickly can we get them in, get all their stuff done, and then get them out? Mm-hmm. And so, it was a paradigm shift. I still, as the director of my department, still manage throughput. I still have to maintain the bottom dollar to make sure that we're productive and we're hitting all those metrics. But at the same time, I got into this job because I want to make sure that every patient that comes through gets treated the way they should be. And I would expect that if my grandmother or my mother or my father were to be in it, they would get the exact same treatment they should get. And so one of the things that, again, it should be common sense, but it's not, unfortunately. That you actually have to pause and listen to these people. One of the things that Christine pointed out is these people have not had, and I say people, I shouldn't, I said these victims have not had the opportunity to have a choice, to have the right to answer for themselves. And so when I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I have 3 other patients that I have to get to, I have to medicate this patient, I have to update vital signs on that patient, I have a new patient and I don't even know what's going on, and then I have to deal with this patient who is saying that they've got a problem, and I ask them a question and they don't know how to respond, I can't get frustrated because they need time to process that. But what I can do is I can utilize my resources so I can say, hey, tech, I need you to go update vital signs. Hey, charge nurse, can you tell me, is that new patient a critical patient, or do I actually have some time? And as I learn to manage my patient load, then I can spend that extra time with that person. Again, one of the luxuries that we have in our department is we've got Christine, who in my accounts, she is a saint already. She's achieved sainthood. She's amazing. But we can bring Christine into the conversation and say, look, if you're comfortable with having a conversation with a survivor advocate, we can bring her into the room and you can talk through this and take all that time that you need. But that's one of the things that was difficult to wrestle with, because the doctors, the nurses are getting pulled in different directions. And so understanding that it's appropriate and it's okay to take a moment to pause and let these people have some time to think through their answer, because they've never had that opportunity before, was just something that was different to our staff that we had to work with them on. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I just remember, so one of our nurses, one day, because I'm there, they can talk to me in the break room, they can talk to me in the nursing station, they can buy where they get medication, and we drink water, and, all of that, or coffee, or whatever. And I remember one of our nurses one day, it was in our break room, but he kind of waited until it just happened because of the way people were paced out that everyone kind of left, and he said, "Can I ask you something?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course." And he was like, I just don't get it. Like, he's like, "Can you explain something to me?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." He was like, "We had this patient, and it's kind of the side of the emergency department where if you went with something more minor, it's like the faster side." And he's like, "We had this patient over there, and she came for an STD check, and she ended up crying on my scrubs. And he's like, I wouldn't do that because they're not so clean." They're like a dark baby color, so you can't really see the stain so well. And he was like, "Do you want me to come talk to her?" And he's like, "No, she's gone already." He goes, then said her boyfriend was a pimp, and all the other girls he had in his stable, which he didn't call it that because he didn't know to call it that. He said they all had one STD, and she figured she did too, because he was sleeping with all of them, and so she wanted to be checked. He goes, "I just don't get why she stays with him. Like, if he's a pimp, why is she staying with him?" And he was like, so he just didn't get it. I was like, we said his name, and I said, "Listen, not everyone is as nice as you." And I just kind of broke it down for him, And I said, he's probably been abused, and he probably thinks this is the best that she's ever going to have it. And so we had a conversation for a few minutes till he had to go back. And I will tell you his reaction was he just, right before he went back, he just kind of pounded the table and was like, "Shit, it makes me so mad." Because he wanted it to be like that she was broken, or that something was wrong with her, or if she would just get off the drugs or something. But it's just not that easy, right? And he got it. He got it. But he wasn't happy that he got it, right? But it helps that I think he already got it, but he just needed to talk about it, and so that helps that they can have somebody to talk to, So sometimes it's not, what I found is it's not all patient support. Sometimes it's staff support. When they have, it's not like if somebody dies, then it'll call me, But when it's something like that, that's mirroring trafficking, or we do have a patient that was trafficked, or we had one last week, then they ask me. Because it's easier to hear about it than somewhere out there, somewhere else, or on the news even, than somebody they had to deal with. A patient that they know, or a real person. So a couple case studies.
So these are real patients that have been in our hospitals, not all of California, but at Dignity Health. So the first one was, she came in, presented into the emergency department as alcohol poisoning. This patient was a young female. She had a history of childhood sexual abuse, and she had recently been raped, like within the last week, by her dad. And so she took the Greyhound from where she lived into the city. And when she got into the Union Station, she was crying. She got off the train and she was crying. And she actually wasn't exactly sure where she was. I mean, she knew she was like sort of in LA, but she didn't know, like, later when we asked her, well, what train station were she at, she couldn't tell law enforcement. She didn't know. So you should, that was, so this guy came up to her, and this was after the fact. So she had a history of alcohol poisoning. She presented into the ED with alcohol poisoning. They just said to themselves, the nurses just said, this was not California, by the way. They just said, oh, this is another party girl, whatever. They treated for alcohol poisoning. They tried to discharge her at like 2:30 in the morning. And she said, I'm not fine. And she went into the bathroom. She started throwing up blood. She rechecked herself into the ED, which I had to see her again. and then she, by that time, the social worker came on and they called me. And like, I got a call 8 a.m. and being like, we need you to come. And so what happened was at the Greyhound station, some guy came up to her and was like, oh my gosh, you're crying. Are you okay? And she already knows what happened. I didn't tell her the story. And she's like, I need help. Yeah, I need help. I'm not okay. And he's like, oh, why don't you come with me? So the girl goes to the car. She gets in his car into his back seat, and he has an outfit for her. She changes in his car, and he puts her right on the track. And she couldn't remember where. She didn't know where she was. And then he waited for her to like make him money, and then she picked her up. She didn't make money, and or enough money, and so he brought some of his friends, and she was gang raped, and then he poured alcohol down her throat. That's why she presented with alcohol poisoning, and dropped her, threw her to the emergency department. And so when I did speak to her, she was shaking. The nurse was not so kind and empathetic to her. I'll say that. I saw her pull out the IV, not very kindly, and the girl was shaking. And I was like, I looked at the social worker and I was like, and we got upstairs, and she was like, yeah, she wasn't the best, huh? And I was like, yeah, no.
Again, not my hospital.
That's why I said not your hospital. And so we had a discussion because I knew the dad, history of the dad, so I prefaced with the history of my dad sexually abusing me. So she like trusted me. This social worker filled her prescription, which was like a cheap, really cheap prescription at their pharmacy. She just started crying. She's like, no one's ever done anything for me like this before, this kind. And I said, we're going to help you. And we started having a conversation, and I got all that other information. She'd been trafficked, and I knew, right, as soon as I heard about the guy, I was like, you've been trafficked. And then, so we got her into our safe home, and when I was driving her there, she told me a lot of other information. We had to get law enforcement out, and law enforcement started showing her pictures, and because I didn't know what train station. I assumed she was at the train station closest to the hospital, but she actually wasn't. It was the one in LA that was quite far from the hospital. It would have been closest to our hospital, but it wasn't. It was actually quite far from the hospital she ended up at. And And so anyways, I brought her to the safe home, and she was just crying the whole way there. Because she was like, I was figuring out in my mind when you first started talking to me if I was going to sleep on the slide tonight or the like tunnel at the park. And it was like, well, you weren't going to do any of that. So we were going to find a safe place for you. I wasn't leaving until we did. So that is one case of like how it started. When she walked into the emergency department, they never would have suspected that she was a victim of trafficking. And she didn't even know the word trafficking. This patient had no idea. So alcohol poisoning can actually be trafficking because and then this patient actually came back a few days later and did come to California because she was so concerned. She was like, actually, the stress and anxiety can actually make you physically ill. She wasn't like anorexic makes themselves throw up. She wasn't doing that. It was a stress. She was like physically throwing up because she was so worried from those men like raping her that she had like every sexually transmitted disease in the world. And she's probably like the third or fourth person I've seen them do this, that we like tested her, me. I now collectively we a lot. Tested her for like did an STD check and stuff, and then they treated her with antibiotics prophylactically for that. And then once they started giving her antibiotics, like for that, and said, okay, you'll be fine. Like even if you did have something, you're fine. Then she was suddenly okay. So that was, she was like a 2-step ED visit situation. So the second case I wanted to bring up was I've had two-ish males, but this male presented not in California either. He actually was another one who ended up at California second time, but so I was called to him. He had some pretty serious medical conditions. So I'm not sure why he presented in the emergency department. I think he just felt really, really, really sick. I know he was in the hospital for over a week, admitted in, and it was complications from some pretty serious medical conditions. So upon looking at him, you wouldn't think, and most males, you wouldn't think, oh, that's clearly trafficking, right? Because that's not what you don't think of males as being trafficked, right? So when social work did their kind of assessment and whatever questions they asked, they sort of asked him like, how do you survive? Like, how do you make money? How do you pay for your rent? And how, all those kind of things. And they found out that he was basically like, for his rent, he was having to trade sex for his rent. And so they knew that was trafficking, so they asked him if he would talk to me, he would. And he wasn't really well enough to talk to me very long. And so I said, well, I'll come back. And he said, yeah, you don't have to. And I was like, well, would you like me to? He's like, yeah, but it's far. You don't have to use your gas money. It's okay. And I was like, well, how's about 9 o'clock tomorrow? Like 9, 10, okay? And he was like, yeah, he so did not expect me to come in. He's been in foster care. He's been in the whole situation. He fully expected that I would not show up. So I showed back up at 10. And he was like, you came back. And I was like, I did. And so then we followed up, and I got him placement in a shelter. And then he left AMA. And the social worker calls me, and she's like, Christine, I have bad news. And I was like, what? That's not a call you want to get from the hospital social worker. And she's like, patient that you set the shelter up for, he left AMA today. And I was like, no! Because I knew I was going to go back to this room rental trafficking situation.
And so I was like, oh, okay, yeah. So I was at California that day. No, I was at the cast. And I get a call, like, not even an hour later. Christine, this is so-and-so. Oh, hi. That patient. Where? Can you still help me with that shelter? Yeah, totally. Where are you at in Los Angeles? I'm at a hospital. Really? What hospital are you at? In downtown LA. Really? What hospital? California. I almost started laughing out loud. And I was like, really? Oh, okay. I was not that excited, by the way. And I was like, where, are you like in the waiting room? Or are you, she's like in the emergency department? He's like, no, I'm in the emergency department. And I was like, just checked myself in and they just took my blood. And he was like, okay, cool. I said, I'll be right there. I'm going to call in. So I call you and then I call and it was like, I'll be there as soon as I can. So I go and I like talk to them. Like, hey guys, we have a victim here. And they're like, how did you know that? They're so annoyed with me. Not annoyed in a bad way. And he was like, he's at station 4. And they're like outside. So they pulled him into a room, the whole situation. And then the nurse who was assigned to him, she's like, should I ask all the safety assessment questions? I was like, you can try. I was like, I wouldn't do anything that's going to trigger law enforcement though, because he's already been down that road. And he's like, okay. So he goes in with the computer and he's like, hey patient, blah, 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 whatever. And he goes, and so the patient goes, I already talked to Christine. I'm not interested in talking to you about this. Because they're like very personal questions, right? And he's like, I only want to talk to her. So he was like, he goes out, Dan, and he says he only wants to talk to you. What should I document? I was like, dude, you need to talk to Sandra about that. I don't know, but we can do the questions together. Like,
this is why I'm trying to recruit her to become a nurse. She's doing incredible stuff.
And the last one was at California. So if you go in, if you're pregnant, you go in and you think you're in labor.
Please don't come to the ER. That's the biggest thing.
There have been more than one is like, crap! We're gonna run out with the gurney. Someone's in labor on the curb right now. But normally you would go up to the 5th floor where they have what they call OB triage. So they, put the monitors on you. They do all this, and oftentimes a person is not in active labor. They're just in some. Clearly I'm not a nurse. So they're in some type of like prenatal distress or like they're having some type of cramps, and especially if it's a first baby, they think they're in labor, but they're like only 7 months pregnant, so they're like actually not in labor. And so that's that floor. And then if they actually are in labor, then they move them into the section of the hospital that they would have their baby. So I was brought in, I was actually talking to the social worker for this floor at this time, and I was like, so, blah, blah, just kind of just super, she's like, actually I have a patient right now that is on this floor that was potential domestic violence. And I was like, well, if she lets me talk to her, I can talk to her with you. And she's like, okay, well, hold on, don't leave. And I was like, okay. So she goes and talks to her. It's like a couple minutes. She's like texting. So she's like, she says it's okay to come up. She's in this room. I don't even remember what room now. So I go up and we're talking to her together. And so that's what I mean. Like the patients don't even realize. People don't even know what trafficking is. Like we know it like the back of our hands. I could talk to you all day about it. But, so this patient, I was like, so, usually I'm like, so what brought you into the hospital today? Some kind of a nice, sweet opener, rather than, oh yeah, I heard that, were you concerned about potential
safe living, like domestic violence. She's like, oh yeah, my tooth is broken. Oh, so parents, potential domestic violence where she was living, and the boyfriend. And so it turned out, after like having a long conversation, I shared about my own life. And it's always a good, like people feel safer then to say something because they feel shamed, right? They don't want to say, oh yeah, so my boyfriend makes me like have sex with all his friends and give him all the money, like they charge, they feel ashamed about that, like who wouldn't? But if they hear that's happened to you too, then, or something along those lines has happened to you, then they feel more like, oh, I can say that too. Oh, okay, I'm not alone. So she told us that her boyfriend was making her have sex with his friends, and that's how they were getting the ring. And he was beating her, and her parents were beating her. And so basically she had no safe place to be. And so we recognized that was trafficking. She started crying, which I usually make people cry. It's not intentional. I'm a really nice person, I promise. I usually make people cry. And so she just didn't realize that was wrong. It had been happening to her since she was a little girl. She had been sexually abused. Her parents had done things to her, sexually abused her and used her, and so she didn't even realize it was wrong. And if we hadn't gone in and talked to her, she would have been in that. So we got her into a safe home, and a few weeks later she was back, all those kind of things. And so what I love about, one of the many things I love about the hospital is it sort of feels like an adventure, right? So if you love order and you love going in and sitting at your same desk and doing your same tasks every day, answering your emails and clicking off your tasks 1, 2, 3, 4, and you probably wouldn't love this job. But if you love the sometimes chaos, but we can potentially save lives, right? Then this job is amazing. And also we work on a team. So I'm working with the hospital social workers and the doctors and the nurses and all of that. So I'm not alone in like helping this individual.
Okay.
And following up with her. So those are a few cases. So somebody could be pregnant and somebody could have like extremely serious medical conditions, and there's many, many more cases that we could talk about.
I was saying, you left out my favorite one.
Well, I can only talk about so many. So we could talk about them. I mean, if you want to talk about one.
Sure, we can keep going. One of the things that I love, so Christina and I have had the opportunity to work together for quite a few months now. I think we're on month 9, I think, at this point. And it has been so inspiring for me to see how Christine just jumps in and has become a member of our team. And I hope that you feel that benefit, because that is, in my opinion, the best thing about this program that we put together is there's no longer a separation. And I think that's probably a lot to do with the fact that ER staff work together and bounce ideas off of each other. And as long as we show that we are all in it together, then you're going to become part of our team. And so Christine has done that. And the best part about that is it works both ways now. These patients have a relationship with Christine, and we're screening them on our side. And so people are starting to know, and the word's starting to get out on the street, that if this is something that's happening, the California Hospital is doing something about this. And it's become a big success story. One of the things that sticks out to me is Christine called me one day about a patient that had come in, that called her, said, hey, she'd been trafficked for way too long. And she came in because somebody had thrown her up against a wall and she was complaining of a severe headache. And in a healthcare setting, that becomes a big concern because we get concerned about what could be going on in the brain. And so Christine called me and said, so I have this person who called me, but she said she would not step foot into a hospital because while she was being trafficked, they did a makeshift clinic or makeshift hospital where they did terrible things to this person. And so she's terrified of anybody in scrubs. And if you bring her into that hospital setting, she will not come in. And so Christine and I had a conversation, and I said, okay, well, is she comfortable having a conversation with me? And she said, well, let's have a phone call. And I said, okay. So we put her on speakerphone and identified myself, and Christine and myself were in my office. And I said, well, what would it take for you to come into the hospital? I'm worried about a couple things, and explained that to her. And she said, well, if you can promise me that you won't poke me with a needle, and that nobody in scrubs will come by me, then I'll come in. I said, okay. So we actually ended up doing a couple things. We did an entire 5.5-hour examination in my office. We had the doctor and the nurse change into street clothes. And so it was an interesting experience because, we actually took that one patient and turned them into a one-to-one patient, which means that I took that nurse out of the staffing matrix for our department and said, okay, for the next 5 hours, you're dedicated to this one person, and you're going to do all of the workup for this individual. The doctor, again, changed into her street clothes, and the 4 of us ended up working with this individual, canceled a handful of meetings so that we could make it work. And one of the things that sticks out to me is the fact that on her way out, Christine, I think, drove her home or walked her back out to the car that day.
Walked her, yeah.
She said, I didn't know that people in healthcare could be so nice. And that's something that I have not let go of. And that's kind of the big reason that we get into this, is we want to help people. But when people don't feel safe for the stuff that we're trying to do, we're doing something wrong. And so it's just a different way of approaching the best care for our patients.
So we just want to share with you some of the results of what has happened because of our work. So all this is just like how we've already talked about.
Yeah, you can go to the next slide
Yeah.
to the findings, yeah.
So there's been 65 potential cases. So I work with CAST, and CAST has a particular, just like any agency, they have particular systems. So in the ways they do things. So I would say that there's been 65 cases, and there's been 5 phone calls that have described potential cases to me and asked me for assistance on the phone, but where I've not gone in person. But CAST requires that a lawyer goes and does a factual intake for it to be considered a case of human trafficking by law. So not all of those cases have been considered a human trafficking case. So of those cases, you can see that almost all of them are sex trafficking, and then some of them are sex and labor, like 2 of them were. One was labor trafficking, and then we have sexual assault, domestic violence, and then some were unconfirmed or not enough evidence to be any other type of, maybe they were potential trafficking, but a lot of times our patients are too afraid to speak to a lawyer, doesn't want to talk to a lawyer, won't wait long enough, maybe they leave, or I have a couple patients I'm still following up with because they only want to talk to me, but then their case can't be qualified as a trafficking case, even if all the facts are there. That won't. So that's kind of why the numbers look like they do.
I would argue with that previous slide, the best thing, in my opinion, about that is that this shows that she's a success. Now our social workers, our nurses, our doctors are identifying people that are a potential risk. So whether they're a confirmed case, we've now educated staff to be aware of this and say, hey, let's keep our eyes out for this.
Well, and people know there's help available to them. It doesn't, just because they're not confirmed a human trafficking case by a lawyer, doesn't mean they can't get in. I will still get them into a shelter, regardless if they talk to the lawyer or not. And I will still follow up with them. I will still give them a card that they can follow up with me. I still have a couple patients like texting me periodically, and
and let them know, like, hey, if you ever need help again, like, feel free to reach out to me if you ever need medical help again, or a safe place you can come, you know, kind of a thing. So it's not a failure in my mind, but I just did want to point that out because sometimes people are like a little bit confused. So I do want to point out who is identifying, and this is how it should be. Social work because social work is the one that can go in and have a longer conversation and ask some of those more like penetrating questions about, like, do you have an ID? Like, how are you paying your rent? Where do you live? You know, those kind of things. We have one patient that I've been working with that in the neighborhood I live in, there's a lot of undocumented people because it's an immigrant neighborhood, and this person who was identified through both social work, and we have something called a service navigator that's like an extension of social work. And so she used to live in this basically fixed up garage, and then she was kicked out. So she was homeless, but it was because she was kicked out, and she I believe she was trafficked in that situation, because when she used to live in this like basically fixed up garage that there were like 6 people living in there, like remodeled garage type place, like she said they used to lock me in the like closet sometimes, and they used to make her have sex with like other people in there. And so so she still follows up with me every so often, and then service navigator as well. So and nursing. So nursing is identifying a huge amount of people, which is amazing. And then a few people self-identify, and that is only because they're so desperate for help at that point that they will like literally plead for help. So it's not common, but we've had a couple people self-identify and be like, please help me, I'm being trafficked. Like, it's very, very rare, but it does happen. And then one by a physician. So physicians, not so much, right?
Well, but that makes sense though, because typically our nurses do the assessments prior to and are asking the in-depth conversation just to kind of get that workup started. So that way, then when the physician comes in, hopefully they're tying a pretty little bow on everything that's been done, and then doing their medical screening exam and making sure that nothing's been missed. And so hopefully, if we're doing this correctly, then this plays out just the way that it has. And so that physician is that safety net to make sure, hey, we crossed all of our T's, we dotted all of our I's, we haven't missed anything. I want to make sure that everything's good to go there. So this is, like Christine said, exactly the way that we want to see this working out, which is great.
Right. And then within Dignity Health and within other healthcare systems, there's a network called Field Trafficking. There are systems in place. If someone has been identified as a trafficked person, maybe they've spoken to me or maybe they've self-identified, there's something that they can go in. And we're working on other things too. There's ICD codes if you're in healthcare, you know, that can be added to electronic. There's kind of ethical questions back and forth about like if we should do that or not do that, right? But within Dignity Health, there's something they can do to like basically highlight that name. So like say it was me and I was currently being victimized, they would basically highlight my name so that if someone came to visit me, say i.e. trafficker, then I would just appear as invisible, like so that when they went, security would be like, oh, that patient isn't here. Right, we don't have a patient by that name. You must have the wrong hospital.
And we can also flag them now, so the next time they come back,
right,
we can also follow up to make sure we didn't miss anything as well.
We talked about that too, so that we didn't have to go through all those hoops again. So we would know, oh, we already flagged this person, so we want to trigger it right away, right when she comes back in, because a lot of our patients will keep coming. They've been to our hospital like 10 times in a row. It treats like primary care, but just what it is. So who is identified hospital? So I basically can respond to any hospital or healthcare system in LA County, which I know we're very, very far away from LA County, but LA County is, I think, almost 3,000 miles across, something like that.
I don't know, that's just a lot of traffic as well.
A lot of traffic, it's at least 2,000 miles. So, anyways, it's a very big, we'll say that.
Dignity Health has 4 hospitals. From our main hospital to the one with the N, NHMC, it will take me 1 hour drive time. I don't know the number of miles off the top of my head.
It's like 6.
No, shut up, it's not.
I'm just making the joke that that's how much traffic is in LA.
No, it's more like,
I think it's like 20 or something like that.
It's like 20 miles, yeah. But I can also respond to other hospitals. But you see that most of the cases came out of Dignity Health, 53, 10 other hospitals, and that doesn't count those last month. But you can see that most of the cases came out of the CHMC is California Hospital, where we're from. So most of the cases came there, and that is mostly because of my presence there. Also, it's in downtown LA. But last year, I know Northridge, which is the one at the end, the second one, had the most cases because they brag about it all the time. I don't know why they would brag about having the most, trafficking cases, but they do. So then they're second with 14 cases, and Glendale, and I will point out that Glendale had 0 cases before I came on board, 0, and now they've had 8. So that is huge improvement, like huge. Some have not been actual cases, but a number, they've had maybe 4 actual human trafficking cases come out of their hospital, but it has been because of education and because of me being able to respond out. And then the Long Beach Hospital has had 3. So, and then we've had the other sites like within LA County.
And I would just say, so this is that's with 9 months of Christine being a part of this program, and not that this data was tracked in detail prior to her onboarding, but from my understanding, just like Christine was mentioning, I think California Hospital had 6 or 8 cases. Northridge, I think, had 8 cases. Glendale and Long Beach, the St. Mary Medical Center at the end, had 0. So we're going from maybe a total of 16 across the board to 60 plus. So when I look at this, I say that this is a huge success because we've been able to educate staff, we've been able to empower staff, and then we've been able to bring in a survivor advocate that can relate to the patients and make those patients comfortable and be willing to open up about what's going on, and then 100% change the lives of the people that accept.
Yeah, and we're saving lives, period. Like every day is an opportunity to save lives. And not only through like funds that went into the hospital and stuff like that, but we're literally saving lives of people. Then we had a patient once that came in for a twisted ankle, and it was actually a trafficking case. So, so just to break it down into like the ages and genders, and then I have the cultural. So we see the main age bracket is 22 to 31, and we did have survivor that was 50 plus that disclosed. That survivor, actually, her mom was being treated at the hospital, and so elderly patient, and when social work came in to speak to mom, she begged the social work for help. And so you never know. You literally never know. And female, 58 female, 4 male, and 1 transgender. So obviously the main breakdown is female. But, we have had a few male. And the cultural background is, this is African American, this is Latinx, and then Caucasian, and then the others are Asian, bicultural, so somebody might say, I'm African American, Latino, and white, right? So those kind of things, or maybe they're of another culture altogether.
And this matches the demographics of the patients that we serve. So in downtown LA, we have a very strong African American as well as Hispanic population, and so this breaks down demographically with the population we're serving as well.
So if you're in this area, it will probably look completely different, but in our area, that's just the neighborhood we have. And there's a couple quotes there. These were just from another presentation.
Those are just some, if you wanted to start in your own thing, you could resource with Heal Trafficking, DocPath. Also, there's Global Motto Saving. What I would say is to find a trafficking, a survivor-led or survivor-informed trafficking organization in your area, wherever you are, that is working with a survivor, and start there. To always have a survivor on board. What's really changed things is having this. It's not taking another training. Obviously, you want your staff to be trained. You want people to be trained, but the partnership together is really, and like for staff to know, like they know they can call someone and going to get somebody who can get help, and that has really changed things for the staff.
So we have about 15 minutes left, which is exactly where we wanted to be. One of the things that I want to point out is for the healthcare side, in my opinion, this works. It is a huge success, and I could not be happier with the relationship that I've been able to develop with Christine, and also to get involved with this. And in all honesty, I am in awe of all of you. I am new to this. But I am so lucky that Christine has brought it to my attention because I love being involved in this, and I hope that I get to help make a change and just follow in your guys' footsteps, because I think what you're doing is amazing. Dignity Health is completely on board in regards to healthcare and wanting to identify human trafficking. So one of those resources that was up there, if you go to if you go to Dignity Health and just in the search bar put human trafficking, you'll get a wealth of resources. Dignity, as a corporation, said that they want to be involved at the highest level in regards to healthcare to make sure that we can stop this. And so I do encourage you to go on and to look for that training if you want to go back to your healthcare settings and say, hey, this is something that we could do. It's totally available. It's free for you guys. Hopefully all of you did get the paired tool and a couple of the 101s that we use for the healthcare setting, but we'll keep that for you. You guys want a couple of extra to bring with you. But with that, I wanted to give you the opportunity to ask us whatever questions you felt would be beneficial for you. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that one of the healthcare systems has a questionnaire that they do ask people, because I got to speak at, when they rolled out the system about my experience with hospitals and healthcare, which was not good.
Yeah.
And this is great, but I guess because I'm further down the road, I can see further down the road. And is there anything in those questionnaires that pertain to people that aren't being trafficked now, that have a history of it?
Right.
Because I ended up at a hospital here in trauma and could not speak for myself. So there was nothing, nobody knew that I had that background, and they're restraining me and they're trying to put the ventilator on, and I'm fighting and punching and kicking.
Sure.
And so why isn't there something like that? Is it that HIPAA stops?
So there's a couple things, and I'll be a little, so my background before healthcare was a previous life. It was in DC politics and healthcare. So one of the biggest things, and one of the ways to fix what you're talking about, in my opinion, would be looking at healthcare at a universal level. Right now, we don't do that. We're private healthcare, and each healthcare system uses their own system, and they can't share that information with other healthcare systems unless you say, yeah, go ahead and I'm going to sign 12 pieces of paper saying I authorize this hospital to share information with this hospital, unless you're within the same system. So we can keep track of, if you were to show up to our hospital 17 times, we would have all 17 of those visits recorded, and we can look at your history, and your history would carry over, so that we would have any of your past medical history, any of your past diseases, or anything that you've disclosed would pop up in our charts. Now, if you were to go from one hospital to another hospital, that information is non-existent. You wouldn't have that. Now, again, that's because of the healthcare system that we use in the United States. One of the things that Christine alluded to was the importance of communication, because just as you described how horrific it was, because I don't know your background, but here I am restraining you because I have to look out for the safety of my nurse. And so if somebody comes in and is swinging or punching at them, well, then by definition, you are now putting my staff in danger. So I'm going to do one of two things. I'm either going to chemically make you more comfortable, might make you a little tired or a little more relaxed, or I'm going to use restraints. I'm going to tie you down. Both cases aren't great. The solution to that is having a conversation and getting to know that. So for us, we don't ask those questions specifically within our triage, as I was talking about earlier. However, under our primary assessment, which every single patient has to have a primary assessment, both done by the nurse that's taking care of them, and then has to have a medical screening exam completed by the doctor before they leave. So there are 2 thorough assessments that have to be completed before you leave a hospital. And so within that primary assessment, there is a portion that's under the psychosocial evaluation, where they ask a whole bunch of different things. Do you suffer from anxiety, depression? Are you able to provide, we call them activities of daily living, ADLs, but essentially, are you able to shower for yourself? Are you able to feed yourself? Are you able to put a roof over your house on your own? And then, depending on how thorough that healthcare system is in asking those questions, I would say that we do a pretty decent job of it. We do go into the safety of sexual activity and finding out how active you are to ensure that you are taking care of yourself. And so those are where those opportunities would lie.
Okay, so no one has really thought yet to expand it so that records could be transferred from hospital to hospital.
Under patient privacy laws,
Because of-
that stuff cannot be shared. Yeah.
No, I'm just trying to figure out, because if a survivor presents themselves for medical care, and if they can't talk because they were injured, then,
Well, and
it would be nice if somebody had a solution, even if it's something simple, like sticking something in your wallet.
I'm sure you could do that, just like people do have like medical bracelets like that say I'm a diabetic, or I mean, I'm allergic to latex, so like I should probably have something. But because of what he's referring to HIPAA, they can't, there's no, I mean, because if I were to have to go to the emergency department right now, there's no way these emergency departments out here would know anything about me medically. I mean, if I were, say, to walk out into the street and hit by a car. I'm not being morbid, it's just, I work in an emergency department, so I see these things. But these things, I mean, I don't know that we'll ever get to the point that, because of HIPAA, that these things will be like where I could walk in any emergency department and they would see all the medical information, unless our, like you're saying, it changed. Sorry, that's my phone. I don't know why it's not. But that is just what it is at this point. But even if the medical system I'm a part of, even when they do know I'm a survivor, they either still act shocked and horrified because it only happens in Thailand, or even when they know, like this recent appointment I had was not good. Like, it's like every time I go to the doctor, I feel like I have to train them, which shouldn't be happening. I mean, it's still not great. I mean, it's still, medical care still has a long way to go. I mean, that's, most doctors don't know that much about it. They're like, oh yeah, we saw that in your records, but okay, sure, whatever. And, it's still like.
we had another question on that.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to add to what you were both saying. You brought up the fact about diabetes and whatever, and you don't know that going from healthcare system
Right.
to healthcare system either.
Right.
So what I would suggest is that with more symposiums like this and more training, and health systems can be slow to catch on, but they all get there eventually, especially when they see that one is doing it, then the next one wants to do it.
Or when we're finally forced to do it.
Or when you're forced to do it.
Yeah.
I'm a former nurse, so I get it. But the other thing that we can all try to do is to get to the point where it is a way to do it. So it is like a medical ID bracelet, in wording that doesn't re-traumatize the survivors, so that you can wear, that doesn't re-traumatize you to look at it. So if there is an emergency, somebody does have a clue, and the healthcare providers are better trained in knowing what that really means for them as
something in
healthcare
your
providers.
wallet, like with your ID. I personally won't want to wear a bracelet all the time.
Well, I
but-
said something,
Right.
something though. I mean,
Yeah.
so that if you're concerned about that,
I agree.
and we make it a topic of conversation like child sexual abuse,
Right.
suddenly
I
now
think
you can
it's
talk
going to
about
get to the point where it's treated like a major health concern, because it is
There are long-term
major health
medical
issue.
effects from it.
Long-term medical effects, yeah.
I'm interested in your thoughts. So, you talk about a lot of victims don't even know that they are victims.
Mm-hmm.
And every healthcare organization you go to across the country has a poster in the bathroom about domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see them about human trafficking. It's not as publicized out there. But I'd be curious in your thoughts about if you would feel that would be a deterrent, because often, from what I've heard, read, seen, a lot of victims present to emergency departments with the person who's trafficking them. And would it be a deterrent for that person to seek medical care if that type of marketing was in an emergency department for the victim?
Kind of that we know we're on to them.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like, I'm just interested in your thoughts, because I have my own thoughts about domestic violence posters personally, because I sometimes do see that as a deterrent.
So I'll tell you, we have 4 signs posted in our department right now, and we're catching more numbers than we ever have. So I don't think...
I don't necessarily mean the numbers, I mean more like, what is it? Because if you put the numbers up, it's one thing, because if I don't know I'm being trafficked, the numbers don't mean anything to
That's
me,
true, that's
right?
true, yeah.
But if I'm putting up this and saying, is any of this happening? Am I looking for this? And if I'm reading this as someone laying in a hospital bed,
Dignity Health has partnered with the National Survivor Network to come up with new posters, and they've been working a really long time because nobody can agree.
If you've seen those current posters,
The current posters are bad. And I'm just being honest. There was just too many words and too many languages on one poster, and whatever. But the newer posters are going to be better, and they're just more graphically appealing, and they're going to have less words on them. So I think, in my opinion, that I hear what you're saying, and while a trafficker can sometimes be same gender, but if they were to, and they would potentially be, and I think it's good for them to be on a big window or whatever, but just because they're up doesn't mean that no one's going to force you to get help. They're just out there, right? But if they were in a restroom, like if they're in the women's restroom, then if you're coming with your male trafficker, then you're not necessarily going to go in there with you. And sometimes the trafficker can be the same gender, but a lot of times they are of the opposite gender. And so I do think the restroom can be a safe place to do that, as long as it's not a unisex bathroom. With our bathrooms in the department are unisex bathrooms.
and more are becoming that way.
But it's true. But I don't think it's a dangerous place because people might not even notice them. No one might look right by them. A lot of times when people come in, they're very sick or they're injured or something, and they might not even notice them. So I'd rather have them up than not up.
I guess I say that because having been a victim of domestic violence, I notice every poster in every bathroom I ever see. So if I was someone who was trafficking women or children or anyone, I'd probably notice every poster. Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely.
you're more aware. But if women or children, they don't know that they're being trafficked, the posters may not mean anything.
As a victim, I think you do, but as a trafficker, there was a trafficker that came into our hospital that I noticed in security noticed him. I noticed him. And as a victim, I feel like I notice a lot of things that a lot of people may not notice that security even misses. When they miss it, now they're paying more attention.
I just don't want it to be a deterrent for them not to seek help.
No, I don't think it. I don't think it is, because even this guy, like I watched the girl go up, and he, like, in our hospital, everyone has to go through security, regardless.
Okay.
Like, they have to get a sticker, they have to get checked in, like, and this guy, like, wouldn't go through the line, he wouldn't get checked in, and he went to go through the elevator and to go up to the floor, and the girl did. The girl had 2 brandings, and I mean, she wasn't dressed like she was working or anything, but I could tell she was his victim. She was his victim. Like, I could just tell. And he wouldn't make eye contact with the security guard, and he kept trying to stop him, the trafficker. And he had the brandings, and the security guard kept trying to stop him, and he wouldn't even look at him.
I think we'll have time for one more question.
Yeah, so anyways, he tried to stop him, and I just said to the security guard that was the trafficker. And he just turned around and went out. And so that guy did not care about any posters. He didn't see any posters, he didn't care. He just wanted to make sure that girl went up in the elevator like she said she was going to do, and he waited outside for her. So I think it's fine. If I
feel they instill enough fear that they're likely feel they're just going to come right back out the door when they're done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he didn't see any posters.
Probably have time for one more question. Yeah.
I just, actually it's 2 parts. First off, you talked about your documentation that it creates flags for future. What system do you use?
So we use Cerner. So Epic has the same capabilities, but we currently use Cerner. And Cerner, depending on, and you can have your IT look at how they're doing things. With Cerner, most hospitals don't use either Epic or Cerner to their 100% capabilities. And so one of the things we did is you have the ability to flag, and so when that patient gets repopulated, they will have, because we know that our patients have an MRN number, medical record number, and then an account number. And so their medical record number will always be the same. So they'll flag that, and so when they do that, they can, it'll pop up as a highlight, and it'll say see notes. And as they see the notes, those notes will carry over.
And then it goes through your whole system, right?
It'll get shared dignity-wide.
Okay.
Yep.
Another thing is, what was the initiative that got Dignity to provide a survivor to your department? Because oftentimes the challenge is getting leadership to buy into these sort of services. So besides the fact that they're invested in this, what caused that?
So that was it. Dignity, every year, they hold a corporate leadership meeting, and they say, okay, what are going to be I think they use 3, it may be 4 now, but they say 4 initiatives that we want to pay attention to. They do 4 initiatives for a year, and then they do 3 for 5 years, if I recall correctly. And so the 5-year plan is for the human trafficking awareness, and then they can carry those over. And so when they do that, they said, hey, human trafficking is going to be on the radar. And so, Dignity Health is a Catholic-based healthcare system. And so they said, hey, this is something that we want to do. The sisters that support our hospital said this is something that's important to us. And so those 2, essentially the sisters were the big driving factor. They said, we want this to be a priority. And so Dignity Health said, okay, let's do it. And then that's where they said, okay, what type of grants should we do? And they worked on a grant process. And that's how it came to fruition.
Thanks.
Yeah. It was an absolute pleasure meeting all of you. In my opinion, if we could just all give Christine one big round of applause.
If people have more questions or they want to talk or whatever, my cards are there, but also, like, you're free to come up and chat. Like,
I mean.
And I think there's these,
I'll be here for the duration.
these surveys, do they go to you or do they go to the table?
So my name is Katie Shaver. I'm with OBC TTAC. We were honored to be able to support this innovative presentation and a handful of others throughout the symposium. If you would not mind just filling this out, feel free to come and ask me questions if you want to. You can leave these here and hand them to me, or if you want to take it with you and hand it to me tomorrow, I'll be here today. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Did you have